Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. Well, the Federal Reserve Bank cut its benchmark rate by 0.5 percentage point yesterday. And the Wall Street Journal had a neat headline delivering a booster shot. Taleb, to whom I subscribe, whose opinion I subscribe to, said monetary policy is not a virucide. They keep using it for structural cures when it is at best a weak painkiller. The world's benchmark US 10-year bond yield fell below 1% for the first time in 150 years. That's from Tracy Alloway. The Federal Reserve, in my view, bought a dead cat bounce, and it didn't even bounce, it actually sold off. That's the Dow Jones. And in my view, emptied the chamber for zero purpose. It might work until the end of the day, or maybe tomorrow, or even a week, but no more. And then what? Well, it will be that it will get another cut again, the market is predicting, at the March meeting. And then what? I was talking on the 24th of February about the likelihood of a V-shaped recovery, and I was poo-pooing that. And I think the evidence is showing that that is correct. I think we'll have an L-shape situation. Prior to that rate cut, there was a statement of G7 finance ministers and central bank governors. Have a look at that. And I agree with what the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank President Tom Barkin said. He said, to my mind, central banks can't come up with vaccines. Rabobank, the Fed's 50 basis point signal, an amount of concern about the economy that may further undermine confidence among investors and the general public. That's via T Commodity. And this may force the Fed to make further cuts. Did the Fed just start a self-defeating feedback loop? Indeed they did. And as I said, what is becoming increasingly clear is that the world's economists and policymakers are linear in their thinking and flummoxed by the exponential and multiplicative nature of the coronavirus. As I said, a rate cut or even four will produce a dead cat bounce and then a dynamic move to the downside. Home thoughts, this is from R. von Einem. A lovely photograph, made me think of John Lennon, Love is All You Need. Number 22, Reds by Mark Rothko, courtesy the Donald B. Maron Family Collection, Aquavella Galleries, Gagosian and Pace Galleries, sold for $70 million. I'm a great fan of Rothko, I must say. This was painted in 1957, and it really is very, very beautiful. I tend to prefer a different series, but this is visually very luminous. And then Twombly's 2011 untitled Camino Real, which depicts bleeding red and yellow hoops on a green background, sold for about $30 million, and that's equally arresting. Going back to my last article, which was about the origin of the coronavirus, and I still remain perplexed that folks who are meant to be authorities in this space are sidestepping the issue entirely and writing sort of propaganda material, poo-pooing the entire argument. And I was talking about the bioengineering component of this virus, which is packing an HIV punch in it. And took me to Thomas Pynchon. If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. Pynchon and inherent vice, questions arose like what in the FUCK was going on here basically. And then from Gravity's Rainbow, the one word that rips apart the day. And finally, inherent vice again. Last apricot light flooded landward and brought their shadows uphill, past the lifeguard towers into terraces of bougainvillea, rhododendrons and ice plant. Don DeLillo in Libra, there's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of the things they aren't telling us. Libra is an extraordinary book about Lee Harvey Oswald. And of course, from the Angel Esmeralda, we have a deviate tomahawk. We copy. There's a voice. We have gross oscillation here. Cosmopolis, there are dead stars that still shine because their light is trapped in time. Where do I stand in this light, which does not strictly exist? If you know you're worth nothing, only a gamble with death can gratify your vanity. William Burroughs, again referencing the origin of the coronavirus, a paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on. A psychotic is a guy who's just found out what's going on. Moving on, I like this photograph of the Nairobi National Museum, photo by Amos Onyango via Kenya Pics, and that took me to the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Let us go, then you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky. Like a patient etherized upon a table, let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights, in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. Political reflections, Lavrov, we will not stop fighting terrorists in Idlib to solve Europe's refugee crisis. And that took me back to 2015 when he said, if it looks like a terrorist, it acts like a terrorist. If it walks like a terrorist, if it fights like a terrorist, it's a terrorist right. And this is all about Idlib, which is where Erdogan is protecting folks he inserted there over the last few years who are typically not Syrian. And he's trying to maintain his leverage over Syria, and he's visiting, I believe, Putin in the next few days. I was at a hospital where there were a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody, says Boris Johnson, which I found interesting. Bill Gates' coronavirus has started behaving a lot like the once-in-a-century pathogen we've been worried about. We had yesterday the largest number of new COVID confirmed cases, 2,600 people in the world, Safamoto. The real number could be an order of magnitude higher due to the limited testing capacity. Dr. Tedros, globally about 3.4% of reported COVID cases have died. By comparison, seasonal flu generally kills far fewer than 1% of those infected. WHO says the case fatality rate for coronavirus is 3.4%. The 1918 Spanish flu killed 50 million worldwide, had a CFR of 2.5%, whereas usual seasonal flu is 0.1%. My piece on the 24th of February was about the viral moment and its arrival. That link is on the website. NBC reporter claiming 23 members of parliament of Iran have tested positive for COVID-19, which means 8% of its parliament. That's Dr. Eric Ding. That is a staggering number for a country's leadership. Iran's epidemic must be huge, considering it has around 290 MPs, which means 8% of its parliament are infected. Took me back to Hunter S. Thompson and The Edge. There is no honest way to explain it, because the only people who really know where it is are the ones who have gone over. There are now 223 coronavirus deaths outside China. The number of deaths is still in full exponential growth phase. It doubles about every 3 days, Zorina Q. And that's something I was touching on in February. Viruses, I said, exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. Read this letter in the last paragraph to the Financial Times by Guy Roble in Denver. And he says, should COVID-19 become established in America, it will spread like wildfire. And essentially, there are numerous reports out of numerous areas of the United States signaling it is spreading like wildfire. And in that article, I was writing about the Chinese response, and I was quoting Groucho Marx. Who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And I think, like Charlie Robertson is saying, the US appears to be greatly underreporting coronavirus numbers. I didn't expect this, and nor did he. It's not as bad as Iran or Wuhan, Hubei, but all other places with 5 to 6 deaths had 250 to 1,300 confirmed cases, he says. US figure of 105 cases likely to rise dramatically and soon. As I wrote before, a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine, in point of fact. I was referencing the Chinese Communist Party, but it seems 100% applicable to the Trump administration. 7th of October, writing about China at 70, I said the world in the 21st century exhibits viral wildfire and exponential characteristics and feedback loops, which only become obvious in hindsight. Let's move on to the currency markets. The euro is at 111.51, didn't get as much of a fillip as you'd expect, given the US cut 50 basis points. Dollar index 97.28, Japanese yen 107.55, Swiss franc 09572, the pound is at 127.92, Australian dollar 0.6606, India rupee 73.625, that's been creeping lower. South Korean won 1186.66, the rial 451.49, Egyptian pound 15.63, and the rand strengthened a little to 15.3627. This is a chart of the dollar index from assay GPI, and we've softened up. We're now at 97.262. A lot will depend on how we behave from here. This is the euro-dollar 1 hour chart from FX Pip Titan. He's still saying the point of control is down, and we're currently at 111.50. Commodity markets, gold had a strong session yesterday. We're currently at 1637, and I'm expecting us to go much higher once this this noise, this moment of margin calls and uncertainty plays out, because these are perfect conditions for gold. Practically zero interest rates, if not negative, and a viral phenomena against which we cannot vaccine ourselves. That's why I said I would venture gold is correlated to the coronavirus once the margin call noise damps down. Crude oil all over the place and now at $47.53. I think you sell rallies, but rallies can be very brutal. A Pakistani Navy soldier stands guard at a hilltop position near Gwadar. This is a Bloomberg article. One of China's most ambitious projects becomes a corridor to nowhere. This is Gwadar, a remote scratch of land on Pakistan's southwest coast. Its port is the last stop on a planned $62 billion corridor connecting China's landlocked westernmost province to the Arabian Sea. The crown jewel of President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, designed to build infrastructure and influence around the world. It is an escape hatch from any sea-based blockade. Less than 1/3 of announced CPEC projects have been completed, totaling about $19 billion, according to government statements. The Baluch Liberation Army's desire for a separate homeland in Baluchistan province, where Gwadar is located, has made life there uneasy. In May, militants stormed the city's only luxury hotel, shooting up the white marbled lobby and killing 5 people. But setbacks in Gwadar point to larger problems along the Belt and Road. China is scaling back its ambitions not just in Pakistan, but around the world. The biggest constraint for China now is its own economy, says Jonathan Hillman, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. In a number of countries, projects have been cancelled, downsized, or scrutinized. Malaysia renegotiated the terms of a rail link being built by China and scrapped $3 billion of planned pipelines. Increased wariness about the price of indebtedness to China, which the Washington-based Center for Global Development says puts at least 8 nations, including Pakistan, at high risk of debt distress. All that could result in shaving hundreds of billions of dollars off an estimated $1 trillion of planned Belt and Road spending, according to a September report by the law firm Baker McKenzie. While the value of signed projects increased last year, data from China's Ministry of Commerce shows actual spending stalled at $75 billion in 2019, after falling 14% the previous year. Total spending from the beginning of 2014, shortly after President Xi announced the initiative, through November 2019 is $337 billion. Government figures show far short of China's ambitious goals. Pakistan may be a harbinger of bigger problems, according to Hillman. That is generally where the rest of the Belt and Road seems to be going. It's not dead in the water, but I'm skeptical whether China is going to be able to achieve what it set out to do. City of 140,000 is closer to the Iranian border than Karachi, a 10-hour drive, in an area so remote it was part of the Sultanate of Oman until 1958. Then describing the deep water port, little sign of commerce, the only cargo ship that calls in Gwadar delivers construction materials and sometimes departs with seafood. Occasionally it doesn't arrive at all. A manager who answers Costco's phone in Karachi, where the weekly run originates, says the line is operational, but it's up to the captain whether he wants to stop in Gwadar or go directly to Oman. The captain recently had a cold and didn't want to stop, the manager says. Declines to give figures for cargo volume. Everything is going to be fine, Kashani says. The volume of trade is going to increase tremendously. My impression was that this place was completely neglected by the whole world, Zhang says. I felt this was a mission impossible. This port is now becoming a node in international shipping, he says. Of course, the quantity is not big enough. But it takes time. By 2030, we believe Gwadar will be a new economic hub of Pakistan and will be the highest GDP contributor to Pakistan's economy. We have three basic issues: power, water and security, Kaka says. All three of these issues have now been taken care of. Now things are moving in the right direction. A proposal for a project called China Pac Hills envisaged a gated community with a Hong Kong financial district, luxury housing for 500,000 Chinese professionals who could move to Gwadar and provide a labour force by 2022, an influx that wouldn't sit well with either Baluch separatists or the Pakistan government, according to an economist at the Collective for Social Science Research in Karachi. The full-scale version is not really in the cards. It's going to land in a far more modest place than envisaged. It's not going to be a game changer. The CPEC project was intended to reduce oil and gas routes from the Middle East by thousands of miles, a way to cut overland into Western China instead of going thousands of miles around South Asia and Southeast Asia by ship. China and Pakistan deny any military intentions. Gwadar could be a stopping point on the way from Sri Lanka through the Maldives to Djibouti, where China has built its first military base on the Horn of Africa. If China's interests were purely economic, says economist Saeed, it could have helped expand the port of Karachi, already connected to the highway from China, instead of seeking to build new roads through desolate, dusty, and dangerous Baluchistan. My hunch is there won't be splashes of money anymore. The investments were only an incentive. China's ultimate objective is not to build connectivity, but to increase Beijing's political and strategic influence. Prone to landslides, threatened by attacks, has yet to be connected to roads leading to Gwadar. Pakistan and South Asia. It's hard to imagine this as a viable freight corridor. Chinese are having some regret about making Pakistan the flagship. There's a lot more caution on all sides. This is a development site near Gwadar Port, operated by China Overseas Ports Holding. This is fishermen sorting through their catch at the harbour in Gwadar in July 2018. Severally, I've spoken about what Xi Jinping said specifically at FOCAC 2018, when his audience was African presidents, but I think it applies to Pakistan as well. And he spoke of the end of vanity, which I characterized at the time as a substantive linguistic recasting by Xi Jinping. I then discovered Ecclesiastes, and Xi was clearly ahead of me in this regard. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Sub-Saharan Africa. South Africa is officially in a recession again. Its GDP declined by 0.5% in the fourth quarter, after declining by 0.6% in the previous quarter. 2 consecutive quarters of decline is the definition of a recession. I wrote about the COVID-19 and Sub-Saharan Africa, and I used the R word. I said there are 2 issues with respect to the coronavirus. The first issue is whether the coronavirus will infect the continent. We know that it is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative. We know exponential disease propagation looks like this. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, nothing, nothing. Then cluster, cluster, cluster. then boom. So we know about that risk, although some folks have been downplaying it, saying there's something in the African genes that's preventing the continent from getting it. But the answer will surely be discovered imminently. Outside the question of infection, I said it's about the COVID-19 economic blowback. I went through the forecasts of the African Development Bank. Outlook continues to brighten. Real GDP growth estimated at 3.4% for 2019 is projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2020. IMF expected to strengthen to 3.5% in 2020. World Bank 2.9% in 2020. But interestingly, the World Bank put in a proviso: risks a sharper than expected deceleration in major trading partners such as China, the Euro area, or the United States, we're going to get all three, would substantially lower export revenues and investment. A faster than expected slowdown in China would cause a sharp fall in commodity prices, and given Sub-Saharan Africa's heavy reliance on extractive sectors for export and fiscal revenues, weigh heavily on regional activity. That's what we're getting. Therefore, all those forecasts are defunct and debunked. We've seen a dramatic, we're going to see a dramatic negative print in China in the first quarter, and I think the second quarter. Commodity prices have been crushed, as we've already discussed. China is taking a third less West African oil as virus hits demand. I spoke about the China-EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon, which has gone negative. And I said then that the Rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon, and how African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker were also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. A 1 percentage point decrease in China's domestic investment growth is associated with an average 0.6 percentage point decrease in Africa's exports. I referenced Moody's, who downgraded Nigeria to negative and pronounced that foreign investors are propping up the Naira to the tune of $16 billion. And I said then, everyone knows how this story ends. When the music stops, everyone will dash for the exit, and the currency will collapse, just like it's collapsing in Lusaka. I produced this graph from Nonzo2 to give you an idea of how much of the FX reserves are composed of this hot money. I also said balance sheets are maxed out, debt burdens have increased, affordability has weakened, a shift in debt structures has left some countries more exposed to financial shock, and they're being visited with one right now. And on top of this, we have a locust invasion, locusts in the Horn of Africa, and this could go 400 to 500x in the next couple of months because of the rainfall patterns. I concluded by saying, buckle up, this is a perfect storm. That follows on my article from the 9th of December when I said it's time to big up the dosage of Quaaludes. Now, coronavirus tests could be ready within weeks across Africa. World Health Organization's regional director for Africa says she expects that all nations in Sub-Saharan Africa will be able to test for the coronavirus within a couple of weeks. So this is the other problem I referenced on the 27th of Jan, when I said we've just not been diagnosing anybody. So if you've tested 20 or 21 people in Ethiopia and you've got no cases, it's meaningless, right? So I think we're going to see a lot more cases once the World Health Organization deploys all these diagnostic kits. Moeti Tshidi told the BBC that 33 countries in the region already had the facilities in place. A month ago, only Senegal and South Africa did. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has hurried to train its 54 member countries in testing for the virus. There's a short interview with the WHO Africa Director, Moeti Tshidi, says the continent's ability to tackle the coronavirus has improved extremely. Well, Senegal confirmed its second case of coronavirus. We know what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. The question is, looks like we're in that nothing, nothing, nothing phase. 24th of February, I was talking about the virus. I said, we're past the point of no return. 16th of February, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. In an interview with Bruce Whitfield of Radio 702, I expressed my concerns, that was a few weeks ago, about coronavirus making landfall in Africa. 27th of January, I said I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. I said that was a racing certainty. Bole remains the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness, with 6 direct flights to China a day. And Zero Hedge said this could mean super spreaders during incubation period, undetected by temperature readings, or showing no symptoms, likely invaded Africa, were his words, from China. On average, 1,500 passengers per day arrive from China. Bill Gates, this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China, he said. He said Ebola is terrible, but it's not a lightning flu. The Zambian kwacha, about which I spoke, is down 9.22% year to date. The China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon I was mentioning, it was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. The fallout is being experienced as far away as Germany. The Rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. And I said African countries, heavily dependent on China being the main taker, are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. The pressure point, I said, will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. South Africa's second recession in 2 years adds pressure to rates. GDP shrank an annualized 1.4% in the last quarter of 2019. It's going to shrink a lot more, because that's before the virus has hit, compared with the revised 0.8% decline in the 3 months through September. Contraction means South Africa has had 2 recessions since Ramaphosa came to power at the start of 2018. For the full year, economic growth was 0.2%, the lowest since the global financial crisis, and it's going to be negative for the full year in 2020. The Rand extended its decline 1.4% weaker. That was at midday, but then rallied after the US announced the emergency rate cut. South African All Shares down 7.23% year to date. Dollar Rand, this chart is from Slipcatch, 15.37. You can see the sell-off and then the rebound. Egyptian pound 15.63, EGX30 is down 11.04% year to date. Nigeria now tops South Africa as the continent's biggest economy. That's from Bloomberg. Nigerian Stock Exchange has said it won approval for members to become a listed company and had appointed a board of directors paving the way to offer shares to the public. Nigerian All Shares down 2.19% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 2.04% year to date. The Wuhan Shake has made it to Africa, where Tanzania's President John Magufuli greeted Maalim Seif Sharif Hamad at the State House with a leg shake rather than a traditional handshake. Eric Olanda. The Central Bank of Kenya announced yesterday that they were going to be purchasing US dollars, planned to buy $100 million every month between March and June to increase foreign reserves, and that it will purchase a minimum $1 million from banks at prevailing rates in each deal. The announcement caught a lot of people's attention. I think that, the reasoning behind that was to be transparent in the 21st century and to communicate its intentions to the market. But also, if they were buying that quantum, and not pre-announcing it, you would have all kinds of conspiracy theories and probably negative feedback loops. Kenya shilling fell the most in more than 3 years amid these plans and traded above 102, as high as 102.35. Nairobi All Shares down 8% year to date, and the NSE20 is down 10.22% year to date. I thank you for stopping by.